In this section, we want to look at polynomial division. We're going to look at two different types of polynomial division. The first one we want to look at is called synthetic division. Now, synthetic division works anytime you are dividing by a linear divisor. What that means is that I cannot have any exponents when I'm dividing in that divisor. Divisor means what's underneath or what I'm dividing by. Okay, so when we do synthetic division, the first thing that we want to do is set up the problem. The way we're going to set up the problem, if you look in this example that they've written out here, is I'm going to take that divisor, that x plus 1, and I'm going to set it equal to 0, and I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to change that sign, so x is equal to -1. Notice that that number is what they've put there on the side. Okay. The next thing that they're going to do is they're going to use the coefficients. Coefficients just means the numbers in front. The coefficients of the dividend, so the numbers in front of all of your variables. If you are missing a variable, for example, it goes x cubed to x, which means I'm missing an x squared. So if I'm missing anything, I have to use a 0. So you notice I've got the 3 for my x cubed. I've got the 0 for that x squared. I've got the 5 for that x, and I've got the -1 for my constant. Okay. After I've done the setup there, what I want to do is I want to bring down that first number. So I'm going to bring down that 3. And then the process from here on out kind of stays the same. I'm going to take that 3, I'm going to multiply it by the -1. I write it down here. Then I'm going to add those two numbers together. So I notice here that they actually forgot a negative on these first two here. All right, so once I multiply 3 times the -1, I write my number -3 there. And the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to add those values together. So I'm going to say 0 plus -3 is -3. I'm going to start the whole process over. Take that -3 now, multiply by a -1, which gives me my 3. Add those numbers together. 8 times -1 gives me my -8. Add those numbers together. That gives me my -9. So I'm going to do that process of multiplying by what's under the line to what's in the corner and adding going down. I'm going to do that all the way until I've run out of numbers. Then I'm going to write my final answer. The way we write the final answer is that very last number is what we call the remainder. So I'm going to have that remainder of -9. Remember, a remainder goes on top of the divisor. And that's from the very beginning. So you notice in the beginning we had an x plus 1 in the denominator, and here in the end we have that as well. So I'm going to put the remainder over that divisor, and then I'm going to build backwards where I would have a constant, then an x squared. If there were more, I would have an x cubed, and then an x fourth, and then an x fifth. I'm going to add an exponent every single time. Okay, and if I've done it right, it should be one less term than what we started with. So we notice at the very beginning we started with an x cubed as our highest value, and now we have an x squared as our highest value. Okay, so let's do a couple of these and make sure that we can kind of understand what's happening. So let's say the first one that we want to look at is we've got 4x to the 4th minus 3x cubed minus 5x plus 1. And we're going to divide that by x minus 2. All right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our setup going. So I'm going to take that denominator. I'm going to solve it. So x minus 2 equals 0. I'd add the 2. So I get x equals 2. That number is going to go in this little corner box here. All right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the coefficients. I start with an x to the 4th. Then I would have an x cubed. Then I would have an x squared, but I'm missing an x squared, which means I'm going to put a 0 in there. Then I'm going to have an x, so a -5, and then I'll have a constant. a 1. I like to underline mine just so that I've got all of the different spaces there. Okay, so now that I've got it set up, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this number down. So I'm going to bring down the 4, and I'm going to start my process of multiplying to the box. Here, so I'm going to say 4 times 2 is 8. I'll write it down underneath, and I'm going to add going down. So 8 plus a negative 3 is going to give me 5. I start over. 5 times 2 is going to give me 10. Add that to 0, I get 10. 10 times 2 is going to give me 20. Add that to a negative 5 gives me 15. 15 times 2 is going to give me 30. Add that to a 1, I get a 31. So now I'm going to go through. I'm going to write my answer. Remember, the last number becomes my remainder. So I'm going to have 31 over that divisor, x minus 2. Then I'm going to build backwards. So I'm going to add that to a 15, which is now my constant. I'm going to add that to a 10 with an x. Add that to a 5 with an x squared. And add that to a 4 with an x cubed. And that would be my final answer. All right, let's try one more example here. So let's say that we have 4x cubed plus 11x squared minus 2x plus 1, and that's going to get divided by 4x plus 3. So again, I'm going to start off, I'm going to take that divisor, the number I'm dividing by, and I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to have 4x plus 3 equals 0. Move that 3, divide by 4. So I get negative 3/4. So negative 3/4 is going to go in the corner there. Then I'm going to take my coefficients. So I'm start off with a 4 for my x cubed, 11 for my x squared, negative 2 for my x, and 1 for my constant. So this one I did not need to use any zeros because I was not missing any terms there. All right, so remember the first step when I'm done setting up is to bring down that first term, 4. Then, even though it's a fraction, I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to take 4, I'm going to multiply by a negative 3/4, which gives me negative 3. I'm going to add going down to get 8. I'm going to take 8 and I'm going to multiply by a negative 3/4, which gives me negative 6. Add going down there, which gives me a negative 8. Take that negative 8 and multiply by a negative 3/4 gives me positive 6. Add going down, I get 7. Okay. Now, this one is a little bit different. So because in the beginning, this was a fraction here, that means that I will be able to reduce every number except the remainder. So if I forget about the remainder, which remember is my very last number, let's look at our numbers. We've got a 4, an 8, and a negative 8. And conveniently, those can all be divided by 4, which was our original denominator of the fraction. So what I'm going to do is before I start to write my answer, I'm going to reduce those by 4. So I'm going to reduce, this will become a 1, a 2, and a negative 2. Remember, I leave that remainder alone. The reason I leave the remainder alone, because in the end, remember, the remainder is already going to get divided by 4x plus 3. So think about it, that 7's already getting divided by 4 when I write it as the remainder. Okay, so I'm going to build backwards. I'm going to add the remainder to my negative 2, my constant with no x. I'm going to put an x on that 2. And I'm going to put an x squared on my first term. And that would be my final answer. Okay. So I'm going to do my setup, right? I'm going to solve that divisor, put it in the corner, get all my coefficients, remembering a 0 if we need it. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to bring my first number down, multiply to the corner, add going down, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, until I get to the end. My last number becomes the remainder. I put that number over the divisor. If I was if I was multiplying every time to the box with a fraction, then I would reduce. If I'm not, then I won't reduce, and I'll write my answer by building backwards and adding a variable every single time.